7 signs you've already outgrown everyone around you. Carl Jung. Carl Jung observed that the pain of drifting from people we love is almost never a sign that something has broken. It is far more often a sign that something has finally begun to grow. Here is the insight Jung set down plainly. In his essay on the stages of life, he wrote, "We cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning," from the Collected Works, Volume 8, and he would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it? You are not failing at the old friendships and the old rooms and the old ways of talking. You have simply arrived at an hour of the day for which the morning's instructions were never written. The ache you feel is not proof that you have become cold or proud or strange. It is the sound of a program ending on schedule, and something else, older and quieter, asking to be heard the squange." So here is what I am doing with that. Right now, in the first person, where it belongs, I stop mistaking this quiet for coldness. I let the people who cannot follow me stay exactly where they are without needing to blame them for staying. I let the unfamiliar shape my life is taking be unfamiliar without rushing to name it a loss. Say it with me. I make the unconscious conscious, and again, I make the unconscious conscious. I would love for tomorrow's teaching to find you too. So if this is speaking to something real, consider staying close by subscribing. If something in you just went quiet while I said that, type the 2 words, "face it," down in the comments, and let that be your seal on it. The first key is, the quiet you feel is not coldness. You notice it first at the small gatherings. The dinner where the jokes land the same as always, and everyone laughs the same as always, and you laugh too, a half-second late, because some part of you is watching the whole scene from a little above it, wondering when the conversation is going to arrive anywhere. This is not superiority, and Jung would want that said plainly before anything else. It is not the coldness of someone who has decided he is above the room. It is the specific quiet of someone whose morning program, to use Jung's own phrase, has simply run its course. In the Stages of Life essay, he wrote that what in the morning was true will at evening have become a lie, and he did not mean lie in the sense of deceit. He meant that a way of living that was exactly right for building a life can become exactly wrong for living the second half of one. The friendships that were built on shared complaint, shared ambition, shared distraction, they served the morning honestly, they were not fake, and now in the afternoon, they cost something to keep going, that they never used to cost. That cost is the quiet you feel. It is not you turning cold toward people, it is you turning warm toward a self you had not met yet. And notice how the quiet arrives in layers. First as a small boredom you feel guilty about, then as a longer silence on your side of the phone call, then as a night you cancel plans not from exhaustion, but from something closer to relief. Each layer feels like a small betrayal when you are inside it. And each one is only the same signal, repeating at a slightly higher volume. Imagine a man who spends 15 years bonding with colleagues over how unbearable the job is, trading complaints the way other people trade favors. It is real closeness, built honestly. And then one year, he simply stops finding the complaint interesting. He still likes the people. He still shows up. But the old current that used to run between them has gone quiet in him. Not because he is superior to it, but because something in him has moved past needing it. That is not arrogance. That is a program ending. And the correct response to that ending is not guilt. It is attention. You do not owe anyone an apology for the hour of your own life you happen to be standing in. Pause for a moment and pick one real relationship in your life where the conversation feels like it is running old software. And just notice that, without deciding yet what it means, without rushing to fix it or flee it, only noticing, I let the quiet mean growth before I let it mean judgment. The second key is, the room you used to fit now feels borrowed. This is a stranger feeling than the first one, because nothing about the room has changed. The same chairs, the same faces, the same rhythm of who speaks first and who defers. But you walk in now, and it fits the way a coat from 10 years ago fits. The sleeves are shorter than you remember, the shoulders pull, and you cannot tell if the coat shrank or if you grew. Jung would tell you plainly, You grew. He wrote of individuation as a coming to selfhood from the Collected Works, Volume 7. And coming to selfhood is not a private hobby that happens in a journal at midnight. It changes the fit of every room you have ever called yours. Think of the word Jung used for this whole process. Individual. A person becoming undivided. Becoming one thing all the way through, instead of many borrowed pieces stitched together to please a room. That stitching is exactly what made the old fit comfortable. And it is exactly what starts to strain once you stop needing the pieces to please anyone. Imagine a woman who spent 20 years as the reliable one in her family, the fixer, the one who smoothed things over at every holiday. And then one year she sits at the same table and notices that the role no longer feels like her. It feels like a costume she is still wearing out of habit. She has not stopped loving these people. She has simply stopped being the same size as the part she used to play for them. Or picture something even smaller, a man who visits his childhood bedroom after years away. The same desk, the same narrow bed, the same window, facing the same yard. And he sits down, and the chair simply does not hold him the way it used to. Not because the chair changed, because he did. Notice how this shows up in the smallest domestic hours too. The Sunday dinner, where you used to sit at the end of the table, cracking jokes to keep the mood light. And now you sit there quiet, not sulking, just no longer needing to perform that particular usefulness. Your sister glances over, half worried, and asks if you are all right. And you are. You are only wearing your own weight differently now. This is where people panic and try to force the old fit back on, tightening themselves into a shape that used to be comfortable, laughing the old laugh a little louder, agreeing a little too quickly, offering the old joke even though it no longer feels true coming out of your mouth. And Jung's warning was exactly against this, because forcing yesterday's coat onto today's shoulders does not shrink you back down, it only tears at the seams, and the tearing shows up later as resentment you cannot quite explain. A short temper at people who did nothing but exist in a room you no longer fit. The wiser move, and the harder one, is to let the room feel borrowed for a while, to sit in that discomfort without immediately either abandoning the room or abandoning yourself. Because the discomfort is not a verdict, it is a measurement. It is telling you exactly how much you have grown since the coat was cut. Some rooms will loosen again in time as the people in them notice and adjust, and some will simply stay a size behind you forever, and both outcomes are survivable. Next time you walk into a room that once felt like home and feel that strange, ill-fitting quiet, resist the urge to explain it away as something wrong with the people in it, or something wrong with you. Let it simply be data about distance traveled. I let the borrowed feeling be information, not an emergency. The third key is the old conversations, and why they now cost you something. You have felt this one at 3 in the afternoon on a phone call that used to take no effort at all. You find yourself translating, choosing simpler words, leaving out the parts that would need too much explaining, not because the other person is unintelligent, but because the distance between what has happened inside you and what they have language for has quietly widened. This is one of the loneliest textures of growth, and almost nobody warns you about it in advance. Jung lived through a version of this himself. In his memoirs, he described the years after his break with Freud, when the vocabulary he needed for what he was seeing in his own depths simply did not exist yet in the language his colleagues shared. He was not choosing distance. The distance was the cost of seeing something they had not yet seen. And notice how patiently he still tried, year after year, to find some shared word for what he was living. Because the widening gap was never his invitation to stop speaking, only his signal that the speaking would now require more of him. Now imagine, not a famous man in a famous crisis, but an ordinary Tuesday, a woman calls her sister to talk about a decision she is wrestling with, something about meaning, about whether her work still fits who she has become. And her sister, who loves her completely, hears it as a complaint about money or a complaint about the boss, and gives good advice for a problem that was never the actual problem. Notice what happens next, because this is where the real cost shows itself. The woman has two choices in that moment. She can keep translating, patiently, finding smaller words for a larger feeling, Or she can simply say, "You're right," and hang up having said nothing true at all. Most people, most days, choose the second one, not from dishonesty, but from sheer fatigue. Translation is exhausting work, and after enough tired days, you start reaching for silence instead. This is how outgrowing someone quietly turns into abandoning them, not through one dramatic goodbye, but through 100 small surrenders to the words that came out fine, even though nothing true was said. The same fatigue shows up again at dinner, with an old friend who wants to relive the same 3 stories from years ago. You laugh in the right places, you do the old choreography, and you drive home feeling strangely more alone than before you arrived. And it happens once more at night, with a partner who asks what is wrong, and receives only, "Nothing, I am fine," because explaining feels heavier than staying quiet. And it happens a third way too, the quieter way, the way almost nobody names, where you simply stop bringing up the thing that matters most, not because anyone forbade it, but because you tried once, and watched their eyes search for the old familiar version of you, and found it missing, and you saw the small flicker of confusion cross their face before they covered it with a kind word. That flicker is not cruelty, it is only the honest limit of a shared language, but you feel it as rejection, and slowly you learn to keep the newer parts of yourself out of the room entirely, offering only the parts that still translate cleanly, until the friendship becomes a careful editing of yourself rather than a meeting of yourself. None of these people did anything wrong, and neither did you. What happened is what Jung called the afternoon arriving while everyone around you is still living by the morning's program. The conversations do not fail because love has failed. They fail because the words available were minted for an earlier stage. Think of it almost mechanically for a moment. A word like ambition meant one clean thing to you at 25, and now at 40, it carries 5 contradictory feelings at once: grief, suspicion, curiosity, fatigue, and something like hope when you say the word to someone still living inside its old. Single meaning. Of course, the conversation glances off. You are not speaking a foreign language. You are speaking the same language with 5 times the weight loaded onto every syllable. And no ordinary conversation is built to carry that kind of freight. Pause for a moment and think of one conversation this week where you quietly chose the shorter, safer answer instead of the truer, harder one. Just notice it. You do not have to fix it tonight. And here, Jung offers something almost tender. In that same essay, he says the change in the second half of life carries a significance of its own. It is not a decline. It is not a betrayal of the people you have outpaced in language. It is simply the arrival of new material that has not yet been translated. Your work, quietly and without announcement, is to keep trying to build the bridge anyway, a little at a time, choosing the slower, honest sentence over the quick, comfortable one, rather than deciding no bridge is possible and going silent for good, because silence feels like peace in the moment and loneliness by morning. And the strange mercy hidden inside all of this is that the very people you feel drifting from you are often standing at the near edge of that same bridge, waiting, not for a perfect explanation, but simply for you to keep trying. I keep reaching across the gap, even when the words arrive imperfect. The fourth key is, what you call arrogance may be arithmetic. This is the one people are most afraid to hear kindly, because we have all been taught to distrust the feeling of having moved beyond someone. We call it pride. We call it superiority. We punish ourselves for even noticing it. But Jung would ask you to look at the arithmetic honestly before you accept the guilt. If you have spent 3 years in real self-examination, sitting with your own shadow, tracking your own projections, doing the unglamorous work of noticing your complexes instead of blaming them on others, and the person across from you has spent those same 3 years avoiding every one of those mirrors, then a gap has opened between you, and that gap is not vanity, it is simply the visible result of unequal hours spent doing unequal work. Imagine 2 brothers who started at the same table, same childhood, same wounds. One of them spends his evenings for 3 years actually sitting with why he flinches at criticism. actually asking where that flinch was born, while the other spends those same evenings numbing the flinch with noise, television, easy company. Nothing wrong with either evening on its own. But 3 years later, the gap between them is not a personality difference, it is a ledger. Hours of honest work on one side, hours of avoidance on the other. And when they sit at the same table now, and the conversation feels lopsided, that lopsidedness is not one brother deciding he is better. It is simply the sum finally showing itself. This has nothing to do with intelligence or worth. A person can be brilliant and still be standing exactly where they stood 5 years ago, because brilliance and self-examination are not the same currency. You can out-earn someone, out-charm someone, outperform someone, and still be doing zero of the actual inner arithmetic Jung meant. The mistake is not noticing the gap. The mistake is turning the gap into contempt. There is a wide, honest difference between recognizing I have done work this person has not yet done, and thinking I am simply better than this person. The first is arithmetic. The second is inflation. And Jung watched inflation ruin people just as often as he watched denial ruin them. Watch for it in yourself this week. The small flicker of superiority, when a friend repeats a pattern you already outgrew. That flicker is not evil. It is just unexamined pride wearing the costume of insight. Catch it gently, the way you would catch a child reaching for something hot. One important correction belongs right here. This is not what people mean when they talk about a midlife crisis. That phrase was coined by a psychoanalyst named Elliot Jakes in 1965. Decades after Jung's own work on the stages of life, and the popular idea that life begins at 40 comes from a 1932 book by an author named Walter Pitkin. Neither one of them is describing what Jung described. Jung was not describing a crisis or a fresh starting gun. He was describing an entirely different program of living, quietly replacing an old one. So if you feel that gap opening between you and someone you love, do not rush to either shame yourself out of noticing it or inflate yourself because of it. Simply hold it as fact, the way you would hold a set of numbers that add up to exactly what they add up to. Nothing more dramatic than that. I stay honest about the distance without turning it into disdain. Before the next key, I want to say this plainly. If any of this is landing somewhere true in you, the kindest thing you can do for yourself tomorrow is make sure this teaching finds you again. So subscribe now, quietly, the way you would keep a lamp lit for later. The fifth key is the 7 faces of the same growing, and I want to walk through these slowly, because this is where the whole feeling finally gets a shape you can hold, and I want to warn you before we begin that none of these 7 are meant to be collected like trophies. They are meant to be recognized like symptoms of weather changing. So hold each one loosely as we go. First, consider the sign of shrinking patience for gossip, where conversations that once felt like connection now feel like static, not because you have grown cold toward people, but because a part of you has quietly stopped needing the temporary bond that complaining about a third person provides. Notice how gossip works. It manufactures closeness fast. 2 people agree that a third person is difficult, and for a moment, they feel united. But it is a cheap unity, built on a shared enemy rather than a shared truth, and when you no longer need that cheap unity, the conversation feels thin, not because you have become superior to it, but because you no longer require the shortcut. Second, consider the sign of no longer needing to win the argument, where you notice yourself letting a disagreement go unresolved, not from exhaustion, but from a genuine indifference to being seen as right. This is one of the clearest markers Jung's own theory of individuation points toward, because the ego's hunger to be correct is exactly the kind of morning program that the afternoon of life quietly retires. You can feel this happen mid-sentence. You open your mouth to correct someone, and something in you simply declines the invitation. Third, consider the sign of feeling drained after time with people you used to feel energized by. This one confuses people the most because they assume something is wrong with the friendship. But often the truth is simpler. The friendship was built for 2 people at a similar stage, and one of you has kept walking while the other set up camp. The tiredness you feel afterward is not judgment of them. It is the fatigue of translating your life into a language that was cut for an earlier version of you. Fourth, consider the sign of preferring your own company on a Friday night to almost any invitation. And here, I want to be careful, because Jung never equated this with being an introvert in the popular sense. He was not describing a personality type, he was describing a season, a stage where the inner work has become more urgent than the outer performance. The solitude is not avoidance, it is appetite. Fifth, consider the sign of noticing you have stopped explaining yourself. Where once you would have defended a decision at length, laying out your reasons like evidence in a trial, now you simply make the decision and let it stand, unexplained. And this is not coldness either. It is the quiet confidence Jung called coming to selfhood, the trust that your own inner authority no longer requires outside ratification. Sixth, consider the sign of finding old ambitions suddenly hollow. The promotion that once felt like the whole point now feels like theater. And this is precisely the moment Jung had in mind in the Stages of Life essay, when he described patients, often around the age of 35 or beyond, whose outer success had stopped producing any inner satisfaction at all. He told the story, and I paraphrase it as he wrote it in general terms, of a businessman who had built exactly the life he set out to build in his 20s, and who arrived at midlife only to find the whole structure suddenly weightless, as though he had climbed the entire mountain only to discover the summit was painted on. This is not depression in the clinical sense, and I want to say clearly, if what you are feeling is heavy or lasting, please bring it to a real person, trained to sit with you in it. What Jung was describing is a philosophical and psychological turning, not a diagnosis. And seventh, consider the sign that gathers all the others, a growing tenderness toward the people you have outpaced, rather than resentment toward them. Because here is the turn, and I want to bring it to you directly now. All 6 of the signs before this one can be read 2 ways. They can make you feel isolated and superior, quietly congratulating yourself on how far ahead you have gotten, or they can soften you, because if you have truly done the work Jung described, the work of facing your own shadow, examining your own complexes, questioning your own persona, then you know exactly how slow and humiliating and non-linear that work actually is. You know how many times you circled back to the very same fear you thought you had already outgrown, and knowing that, you cannot look at someone standing where you used to stand and feel anything but a strange, patient kindness. The 7th sign is not that you have left people behind, it is that leaving them behind no longer requires you to leave them unloved. Now let me put flesh on all 7 at once. Imagine an ordinary week, nothing dramatic in it. Monday you skip the group chat's usual complaint thread without guilt, and you notice you do not even feel the old pull to weigh in. Tuesday, you sit through a family dinner, translating your inner life into smaller words, watching your father's eyes glaze slightly when you try to explain what has actually been occupying you, and you feel only mild fatigue instead of despair, because you no longer need him to understand it, to know it is real. Wednesday, you decline an invitation and sleep instead, and it feels like medicine rather than avoidance. Thursday, an old ambition, the title you once wanted so badly, crosses your mind while you are washing dishes, and you feel nothing where you used to feel hunger. Not sadness, just a strange flatness where the old fire used to be. Friday, you catch yourself about to correct a co-worker's small factual error in a meeting, and you simply let it go, and the letting go costs you nothing. Saturday, you spend 3 hours alone in your own apartment doing very little, and it is, without exaggeration, the best day of the week. And Sunday, unexpectedly, you call the very person you have felt distant from all week, not to explain yourself, and not to apologize for the distance, but just to hear their voice, because the growing has not made you want them less, it has only changed what you need from them. That whole week is the 7 signs, lived quietly, without a single dramatic scene, no confrontation, no announcement, no leaving. And none of it means the people around you are lesser, it means the season has changed, And Jung would tell you the honest, slightly uncomfortable truth, that this changing is not owed to anyone as an apology, and it is not owed to anyone as a boast either. It is simply owed to yourself, as attention. Pause for a moment, right now, and hold up that week against your own recent one. Find one day in your last 7 that already matched one of these signs. Just one, and let yourself see it plainly, instead of explaining it away. I let this whole week be evidence of growth, not a verdict against the people in it. The 6th key is, you are not leaving them. You are leaving the version of you that needed them in that particular way. This is the gentlest and truest way to close this, because the fear underneath all 7 signs is usually the same fear, that outgrowing someone means abandoning them. And I want you to sit with that fear honestly before I hand you the correction, because it is a real fear, not a foolish one. Imagine a man who has been the loud one in his group of friends since he was 20, the one who kept the group together, planned the trips, filled the silences, and now at 45, he finds the silences do not frighten him anymore. He would rather sit quietly than perform. And his first thought, his very first thought, is that he is betraying them by changing. That if he stops being the loud one, he is somehow taking something away from people who loved that version of him. This is exactly where Jung's own life offers a quiet correction. In his memoirs, he described a genuine collapse he underwent around the age of 38, a period where his old certainties gave way entirely, and he had to descend into unfamiliar inner territory almost alone. And yet he did not vanish from the people who loved him. His marriage endured. His friendships continued. Changed in shape but not severed, what he left was not his wife or his colleagues. What he left was an earlier way of needing them, and that distinction changes everything. When you outgrow the version of a friendship built on shared complaint, you are not required to end the friendship. You are only required to stop needing it to be that particular thing. When you outgrow the family role that made you the fixer, you are not required to disappear from the family. You are only required to stop needing their approval to know your own worth. When the loud man goes quiet, his friends do not lose a friend. They meet, for the first time in years, the actual man underneath the performance. And some of them will be startled by him. And a few, in time, will come closer than the old noise ever let them. The growing Jung described was never solitary confinement. It was solitary work that later returns to relationship changed, wiser, and often far more capable of real closeness than the anxious bonding that came before it. So if this whole video has made you feel like growth requires a quiet exit from everyone who loves you, hear this correction plainly. It does not. It requires an honest exit from the roles that no longer fit, while the people themselves are welcome to stay, if they are willing to meet you where you actually are now. The fire behind you on that path is not lost. It is only farther back, still warm, still yours to return to. I release the role and keep the room open for the person. Here is the whole picture. The quiet you feel is not coldness. The room feels borrowed because you grew and the room did not. The old conversations cost more because the words were minted for an earlier hour. What looks like arrogance is often only honest arithmetic. The 7 faces are all one face, a season changing beneath the surface of an ordinary week, and the leaving you fear is never a leaving of people. It is only a leaving of the smaller self who once needed them a certain way. All 6 of these were never 6 separate keys at all. They were 6 turns of the very same key, the key Jung named coming to selfhood, and every one of them was trying to tell you the identical thing, that the ache of outgrowing your circle is not evidence of a broken bond. It is evidence of a life finally living its own hour, instead of borrowing an earlier one. None of this makes the people you love wrong, and none of it makes you finished either. Growth like this rarely announces itself with fireworks. It arrives the way afternoon arrives, gradually, undramatically, until one day you simply notice the light has changed, and so have you. And if some of the rooms you once fit no longer fit, that is not proof you have lost anything true. It may be the surest sign yet that something in you has finally arrived at its own honest hour. So here it is once more, in the first person, where it belongs. I stop mistaking this quiet for coldness. I let the people who cannot follow me stay exactly where they are, without needing to blame them for staying. I let the unfamiliar shape my life is taking be unfamiliar without rushing to name it a loss. Say it with me, I make the unconscious conscious. And again, I make the unconscious conscious. If you have outgrown the room, the question worth sitting with tonight is not whether you should go back to fit it, but whether the room, in time, might grow to fit you again.